I am Richard Coe. I am the editorial page editor at the Bulletin. I'm here to talk to you about public records, it says. If you get nothing out of this, one of my best tips is that draft reports are public records, and that has been so helpful to me in scooping other organizations, in ferreting out what an organization is going to do before it does it. So draft reports are public records. So you can, if you know that they're working on something and you can find out in some way or another that they've written a draft, that's a public record. So I've used that several times to my advantage. Yeah.
You can quote that, the draft?
Yeah. You just say it's a draft. And, just explain it is a draft, and obviously it may change later, but you can quote it. Yeah, why not? Let's see. I'm going to give you some direct tips like that one, but I think I want to talk more about some stories about public records requests that I've made, because I think it's more interesting, and they are somewhat illustrative of some points I want to make. So I'm going to start off with a story about a public records request. I think we all know that foster care in Oregon is a difficult subject. The foster care system deals with some of the most vulnerable children, and I don't know if you've ever read any of these reports that the state puts out. I think they're called critical incident reports, and what the Department of Human Services does every time a child dies who is in foster care is they do an investigation and they release it. It's a public document. I mean, there aren't any names in there really, but still you can get a sense of what happened. And inevitably, it is sorrow piled upon sorrow, mistake piled upon mistake. I mean, these are all tragic cases, and they all have a terrible bad ending, and so that's made me, reading those has made me really want to write more about foster care when that issue arises. And so a couple of years ago, the Department of Human Services, made a statement that they were making all sorts of improvements in how they were going to do foster care. And so I made a request. I can't remember the exact details now, but I made a request for essentially the information to back up what they were doing, the achievements they said they had made, and the changes that they're going to make. And so I made a request. At that time, the law was that they had 15 days to respond, 15 business days, and 15 days go by, they didn't respond. So what I did in that case is something I've never really done again, but I thought it was a little stroke of genius, but I'm biased. I made a records request then for all the emails that were written in response to my initial request, and they did respond to that one. And I got all these emails from the upper echelons of the Department of Human Services. They mentioned some contact with the governor, and it's more nuanced than this, but it basically boils down to they're all having this discussion about how much they didn't want to release the records to me because it would make them look bad. And I think that's, they even had a draft response to all my questions they had written up, but they still decided not to release it because they thought it would make them look bad. And, most public records requests that I have made, I get them swiftly, at little or no cost, but, the thing I think we all probably recognize intuitively, if we've not experienced it, is that when it is going to make the agency or the department or whatever look bad, you're going to run into problems. The public records law is imperfect. It's made with the best of intentions, but it's imperfect, and what we have to do, and what I sort of actually enjoy is trying to fight through those imperfections and get the records, because sometimes it's really interesting and it's really very important. Did you have a question, sir?
What was the portal when you went to speak to the DMV?
To the Department of what was the portal? Oh, I think I probably contacted their public affairs office and asked who handles public records requests, and then made it. That's sometimes now agencies have specific websites where you have to make submissions because they track them, but frequently talk to their media relations, public affairs person, ask them how they handle public records requests, and then they'll tell you what's what. So let's see. So I want to tell you one more brief story because, like I said, I think the stories are more interesting than the tips I'm going to give you. But so in Bend, there is a service called Dial-A-Ride, and that's a service for people who are living with disabilities to get transportation, like a taxi service to where they need to go. And, it's a great service. But what we had heard is that there were a lot of complaints about how well that service was working, how well because if you are living with a disability, it's not always easy to get in a vehicle, to get out, to make your appointment, to schedule it. I mean, there's just, you need a lot of consideration, extra time, and anyway, that can lead to problems. So our reporter at the time, she made a request from the agency that is in charge of that for all their complaints. So a week went by, 2 weeks went by, a month went by, 3 months went by, 6 months went by, no records, no response. Then finally, after we made a bit of a fuss, after a year, they released the records. There were thousands of complaints, thousands, as you might expect. Maybe you would expect. I don't know. I was surprised at how many there were. And, some of them were pretty minor, like the person was late picking me up and I missed my appointment. I mean, that's still significant. But of more concern was that the complaints were that the driver didn't treat the person with care, keep in mind that they are disabled and so on. I mean, it was annoying and disappointing. And anyway, it was a really good story. But once again, that's just a reminder. When it's going to make the agency look bad, they're not going to swiftly release the records. I mean, I would expect you have to expect trouble, but keep at it because, it took a year in that case, but eventually we got them, had a good story. So let's see. And what was really interesting about that was that the guy who handled public records requests for that agency, the reporter, she asked him, why did he take a year to release the records? And he said, well, I hope you just go away. And I think that's sometimes what they do. But anyway, most of the people I deal with in public records are not like that at all. They're very helpful. You get the records quick and all that, but it does happen. So, okay. Let's see. So there are several problems with Oregon's public records law. The deadlines, even if they are in statute, sometimes agencies will blow right past them. The fees can be so high that they charge you that it's like a barrier to getting them. I don't know about your media organization or your organization, but mine does not have a lot of money. When they come back and say it's going to cost us thousands, that's like, what can we do? You've got to try to talk them into reducing it and downsizing or, scale down your request or something. Back in the day, maybe 15 years ago at the Bulletin, we had a lawyer on retainer that we could, if we got clearance first, you could call him up and you could talk to him about this request you're going to make or this issue that you're having, making a request, and you could get some professional legal help. That's all off the table. And I think that's a real problem because the law is complicated. I don't know if you've ever seen the Oregon Public Records Manual. That's 400 pages or whatever. Half of it is about public meetings, but the other half is about public records. And it's complicated. There's so many exceptions, exemptions. It's, I've been reading it for years here and there, and I'm far from an expert, but it's just really difficult without legal help, and most of us don't have that. So one thing I did to get ready for this discussion, I have a couple of friends who are in state government, and they handle public records requests. So I talked to them, and I also talked to the state's public records advocate. And the thing that really struck me about my conversations with the two people who handle media requests, the first thing they both said is that people think they're just sitting around in their office waiting for somebody to make a public records request. And, I think most journalists know that's not what's happening, but, they get a lot of requests from the general public as well. And so, I think there's an art to making a public records request. You want to build up a rapport with this person you talk to. It shouldn't be a confrontational thing. You want them to be your friend. Ingratiate yourself into them in some way. You can mention, slip in something like, I know you have a lot of other things to do, because that seems to be on their mind, that people don't give them that consideration. And another thing, one of them said to me is that if somebody just asks for something, they can ignore it. If you were an evil communications manager for a state agency, if I, as a reporter, just ask for it, they don't have to do anything. They can just ignore that. I mean, most people are not like that, but they can. And so they said they like the power of a public records request because there are some legal parameters involved, there are some deadlines involved. It can compel a response, so take advantage of it. I think you already know that, but let's see. Also, they hate fishing expeditions, and we all understand that, but one of them told me that they got a request for every text message from the upper echelons of their agency in the past 5 years that mentioned the word Trump. Okay. And now I understand why someone might have made that. Somehow I don't think it was a journalist, that's an extreme example, of course, but they do get overbroad requests like that. Don't be the kind of person who does that. Every agency has their own terms. They have their own lingo. They have their own way of keeping records, and retrieving them is usually, the purpose of the record system is not to fulfill public records requests. It's to serve the purpose of that agency. And so when you are making a request, try to find out what they call things, narrow it as much as possible, learn their lingo. You can work with that communications person that you're dealing with. They can sometimes be very helpful to help you narrow it down and understand what exactly you're going after. And I would just tell them, sometimes people are reluctant to tell an agency what they're really looking for. I mean, in my experience, I just always tell them exactly what I'm looking for. I don't beat around the bush. I just be upfront about it. That way, it gets all the cards on the table. I mean, sometimes you might want to be sneaky about it. I mean, I imagine there are situations when you'd want to be that way and sort of take an indirect approach in. But I think, if you let them know exactly what they're looking for, it'll make things easier. Let's see. And I think also the thing to do, a couple of them mentioned this, is that you can always make more than one request. If you're not really sure what's going on or what you're looking for, make a request, try to keep it narrow, but just think of it as a request to get you started. And then you can come back and make a request later. You can make multiple requests, and I know most of us are working on some sort of deadline. We'd like to be able to write our story, get the information, write our story, but, play the long game too. You can write something for now with what you have. Maybe you get a little public records request in, get it percolating through their system, get those records back, see what they say. Maybe that'll lead you someplace else. Well, then just make another one. So that's one thing. That's one of my other tips here. Okay, that's probably too many tips in a row. So I thought I'd tell you another public record story here. So at the Bulletin a couple years ago, we had a candidate running to be the Deschutes County District Attorney, and we heard that he made a lot of calls to 911. And so we made a public records request, got the request. It turned out over 5 years, I believe he had made 293 calls to 911. That's about I did the math at one point. That's about one every 6 days or whatever. Or is that right? Yeah, I think so. And they were all for parking, or most of them were for parking. Okay, so not something you normally call 911 for. The complication is, of course, that in the data that they released to us, they didn't differentiate between calls that go to the emergency line and go to the non-emergency line. There's usually like a non-emergency 911 line. So I don't think he was probably calling the emergency line all those times, but still, it was a hell of a story, to have a candidate for DA making all those calls. And it took a while. I don't think we actually got it until after he was elected, which was awkward, but such is the life of making public records requests. Okay, as I said, money is the real problem in a lot of public records requests. It's like the moat that prevents you from getting to the castle. I mean, before you even get to the castle walls, you got to clear the moat. And the moat is deep, the moat is wide, the moat is treacherous. There are all sorts of piranhas in there, and they all want your money. I have never personally been stopped because of a money issue, because I just sort of downsize my request or make it happen in some way, and I am a bit of a sucker, and I'm sure my bosses love me because I just usually pay out of my own pocket, make a request, which is really sort of dumb, but that is me. Let's see. But I think, one of the things that the people who work in public records in government told me is that they deal with requests from the media, but they also deal with a lot of requests from businesses as well. And the thing about dealing with businesses are ready to pay. And then they turn around and then they get a request from a journalist, and the journalist wants everything for free, right? Of course we do. And of course we should get it for free, as far as I'm concerned. But, so I think one thing to keep in mind when you're making a public records request, when you're talking to these people, is that they may be a little bit bristly because you're asking for something for free because other people are willing to pay. Legally, they can charge you reasonable fees, under state law. They can charge you reasonable fees. So if they, it's not outrageous for them to put attached fees to a request. Let's see. But there is help. If you are making a public records request, you can't afford it, or you're worried your organization can't afford it, there are three places I know to go for money. One is the Society for Professional Journalists. They will reimburse you, I forget what it's up to, maybe $500? I don't know. But they will reimburse you for those public records costs. That's one thing to help. And then, Jody, who runs this whole schmear, the 4J thing, she told me that this organization has just received a $5,000 grant for public records requests. So if you are stymied by an organization, you made a public records request, they say it's going to cost you $1,000, $500, you're having trouble coming up with the money, tell Jody about it, and maybe she can help you out. She's got that money. That's a wonderful that's a wonderful thing, especially, in lean times for us journalists. Let's see. I'm going to skip that. Okay, I'll tell another public record story here. So we had a candidate who was on the Bend City Council, or a member of the Bend City Council, and he got into trouble because he had allegedly groped a young woman in the bar. And, I happen to believe, I don't think everything was ever proven in this case or anything like that, but, I believe the young woman. That's neither here nor there, but, what occurred to me is there might be a lot of chatter among the city councilors back and forth about what was going on in this whole thing. So this is back several years ago, and I think a lot of times, maybe still today, public officials don't realize that their text messages that have to do with their work as government officials are public record. And so I asked for all the text messages about that issue and got back some good stuff, nothing quite sizzling, but, what was really interesting to me, of course, is that the counselor who is at the focus of this, he didn't reply at all. He didn't return any of his text messages. Some of them I was able to figure out because he had sent them to other people who did send them back to me. But that is all another one of these imperfections in the public records law. A lot of times, the custodians of records are public officials, and it's on their private email, it's on their private phone. It's up to them, really, if they're an honorable person, whether or not they comply, and to the extent they comply with a public records request. That's a real flaw for me in Oregon's public records law, because I've made requests for text messages, I've made requests for emails from public officials, and believed very strongly that I don't get back everything that was relevant. And I don't have a solution to that. Maybe the way to get it is through somebody else who also happens to be a public official, and maybe they will send it to you, but if the communications are linked. But that, to me, is a real flaw or imperfection in Oregon's public records law. The custodians sometimes are not people. It's not sort of an organization that is custodian of the record. It's an individual. It's on their private phone, and it's in their private email account. I think that's highly problematic. I think there should be, some agencies have switched to require their members of committees to use public accounts for any transactions. One of the things that's illegal in Oregon is to have serial public meetings, like through text messages or phones. Like if we're all on a committee, and I'm sending you an email, and then you're sending him an email, and we're trying to build a consensus or make a decision, that all those emails, that text chain or email chain, should all be a public record. But that's essentially a violation of the public meetings law. Whether or not it is ever disclosed, I've tracked down a couple of those instances. It's always fun, to catch public officials doing that. But that's another problem with Oregon's public records law. Okay, now I want to give you a magic number. This is the phone number for Oregon's Public Records Advocate. I don't know if you guys know who that is or have ever dealt with him, but his phone number is 503-871-9036. 503-871-9036. He's Oregon's Public Records Advocate. He works in a mighty office of two people. Now, he is not the journalist advocate. He is the public records advocate. And there's a distinction there. He can't give you legal advice, but he can help you understand the law. He can opine about the law. He can help you understand how to build like a case that you deserve to pay zero to get a public record. Fee waivers are what most journalists ask for when they're making a public records request. And my advice there is to build the case right from the beginning. It's not enough that you are a journalist and you are asking for a record and trying and then intend to publish something about it. That under Oregon's public records law, that is not enough to entitle you to a fee waiver. You have to. They also have a bit of a balancing test of whether they think it is also in the public interest to give it to you for free or at a discount. So when I make a public records request, I start right from the beginning and I write a little paragraph. I mean, it's just a standard paragraph that I include in every request, about what I intend to do with it. I work for this organization, explain why this is an important issue, and I plan to publish a news story or an editorial in my case, expounding on this and explain to people why it's important and changes the lives of Oregonians. But that's one thing that when I was talking to him the other day, he said he can help you build that case. Not in a legal sense, build the argument why you should be entitled to a fee waiver. And he said, call him. So I would take him up on that offer. I've called him a couple times, but perhaps I was asking more for legal advice than anything else, and he can't really do that. But he can help you understand the law, and the law is difficult and complicated. So, you do, and it may take him a couple days to get back, but he will help you out. Do you have a question or no? Todd Albert. Todd Albert. Albert, I believe. Yeah. Let's see. Okay. Well, one last maybe story about public records. So in September of last year, I heard about a guy walking across the street who was struck by a car and killed. And that's essentially all the police department said about this. And I was just really curious about that because, like most of you, I walk across the street all the time. and I happen to cross every morning with my dog. I walk across this busy street, and it's always a dance with death in a way because, many cars do not stop even though they're required to in this particular intersection. People are looking at their phones. It's just something that really bothers me. So when I read this, I was just very curious because the release didn't have his name. It really didn't have any details. Where it happened and when. But, it didn't have his name. It just really struck me. And so I made a request for the police report. And the police department said, well, we can't release that because it's under investigation. And that's correct. That's true. And so I asked, well, so could you send me the police report when it's no longer under investigation? And they said, no, we don't have it set up so that we can trigger the release of the record that way. Just make another public records request. And so what I did, every month I would I'd send in another public records request. Have you heard anything about this? Have you heard anything about this? Blah, blah, blah. And, I reached out to the DA. I asked him about it. And, he's a guy I trust. I didn't think anything funny was going on here. I think, legitimately there was an investigation and it was taking time. I get that. But it just bothered me. So anyway, just kept putting in requests. So, let's see. So eventually, at the end of February or in March, remember it happened in September. End of February and March, I finally got the police report and investigation. The police department gave me contacts for the investigating officer and his superior. They were ready to talk to me about it, which I really appreciate. And but the thing that really bothered me is so many people who I see drive by on my crossing my street is, they're looking at their phones and they're not looking at the road. And it really struck me that they didn't investigate that. I mean, they didn't, and they explained why, and it's a reasonable explanation. It was it was sort of a non-standard investigation of a fatality, because when the gentleman was struck by the car, he fell and hit his head. Police arrived, ambulance arrived, but he didn't die on the spot. He died several days later, I assume. I mean, I don't know why, so I shouldn't say anything, but I mean, it was a brain injury. He died several days later. And so they didn't treat the immediate investigation as a death investigation. They cited the driver for failure to stop for a pedestrian at a intersection or something like that. But it just really struck me that they didn't investigate whether or not this person was on a cell phone, and they gave me a good explanation of that, and it turned into an interesting, I mean, for me at least, it was interesting editorial about how they in making these choices in investigations of when to delve into cell phone records and why they didn't in this case, and why it's problematic for them to delve into cell phone records without further evidence. I mean, it seemed really significant, especially because of the danger presented by so many people driving and looking at their cell phones. So it turned into a good editorial. So, and I think, whenever, sorry, get a little emotional. Let's see. So whenever a person dies violently, I think we owe it to them to talk about what happened to them. And I know that's hard, but in this case, we had a person who died violently. It was reported to the public sort of anonymously. And what really bothered me was that, they said he was elderly. That made it somehow okay. I apologize for getting emotional. I don't know why I do, but I do. Anyway, I think that's, in that case, because I got the public records request information and I looked into it a little bit more, maybe I don't know exactly why that guy died, but at least we tried. I believe so, yes. Yeah. Yeah, it was in Northeast Bend, Northwest Bend, yeah. No, it was not in Newport, no. Yeah. Well, anyway,
I just want to thank you for being emotional right now. Because in journalism, so often we're told to not be emotional, or that it could be a failing. And I think that the way forward into a new journalism is to embrace those emotions we feel, because we're not robots. So thank you.
Well, and also that's what drives us to tell that story.
Yeah, well, thanks. Well, now, if you are interested, and if you have something to say, I'd be curious if any of you have tales about public records requests that you've made, and whether or not they were a failure or a success, because I think we can learn from each other a little bit about your experiences with public records. Have any of you made a public records request that makes a good little story? Go ahead.
Well, I'm a little bit off topic here.
Okay.
I have a question about what's going on with organizations that now are using Zoom for meetings, and they're recording those. Is there a requirement to retain that recording?
Well,
I'm dealing with a little fire-impacted community where everything was wiped out. They have a good guys network who has been running a water district. Now they're getting several $1 million to construct a waste treatment facility.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really interested in what's going on in those meetings. I asked them for the recordings, and someone who was supposed to have kept it mislated or something, and haven't been able to track it down.
I don't know what the rule is for retention of records. I think they're. I mean, I know who to call to ask, but I don't know off the top of my head what requirement there is. There is some requirement for retention, though, and unfortunately, though, I can't tell you the answer to what that rule is, though.
Richard, in the Dallas, Google got water rights to the Dallas drinking water. Big story that Google wouldn't say what it was. The town council couldn't say what it was. And so thank God the Oregonian, followed up on it, did a tremendous job of, breaking into that. But Teresa was telling me that they used some legal group. Do you know who that was? And I'm sorry, I cannot remember the name.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I know Oregon got some sort of. I think it was the Society of Professional Journalists got the money from some national organization to hire a reporter for a lawyer for a couple of years, and to help journalists make public records requests. It may have been through that avenue, but I don't know. I'm familiar with that case because I wrote about it, sort of trying to give the Oregonian props for fighting through that, because that was a big issue for that community about water and big corporations, and very important work that they were trying to uncover there. And I think the issue was they weren't disclosing exactly how much water they planned to be using. So anyway, anybody else have? Yeah.
When talking about phone records and text messages and things like that, are we talking about phones that are part of the organization that's given to that person by an organization, or are we talking about private numbers as well? Can you
private? Well, if it has to do with the business of government and maybe not the right phraseology, but if it has to do with their role as a public official, it doesn't matter if it's on their personal phone or a government issued phone. It's all a text message or whatever. I believe it would also be the case that the phone record, would also be available too. You could tell who they were calling, but I've never requested that personally.
And when requesting that, are you requesting it from the individual, or do you go to the phone company?
No, I just go. Usually the point of contact for the organization, like if it was a city councilor, I would talk to the city recorder or whoever handles the public records request, and it would be then they would send out an email and see who responded and send in their text messages, and and sometimes they respond and sometimes they don't, unfortunately. Most times I think they are good about it, because most public officials are good people, I think. That's fair to say. But sometimes if there's a whiff of scandal there, who knows what you get. So, all right. Yes, go ahead. I don't know. I have dealt with that sort of issue from time to time. I guess the key is to build that rapport with someone who, someone who works there. Maybe just keep coming in and talking to them. And I don't have an easy answer for that. There is no good answer for that. I think, a lot of times they can't, though, sort of completely pawn you off, right, and say we can't do anything, because that's not the way the public records rules work. I mean, in this, maybe you dial the magic number in this case and ask Todd, because one thing that Todd Albert does is he works with agencies to help them understand the law and the responsibilities. So, I mean, I don't know if he would do this, but maybe he would, after talking to you, he would talk to them, and just try to explain to them what their responsibilities are. And I mean, I don't know if that would work or not, but that's one thought I have. Go ahead.
Again, with the Little Water District, they stopped publishing their budgets.
No.
It's a requirement.
Yeah.
The last 3 years they haven't.
Eventually, doesn't that become the story?
I think it does.
Yeah, and I would write about that and why they are not. I mean, I would make sure I would nail down the law and see what the actual requirements are. But if they're a public agency, I mean, there are requirements, and there's also what's an interesting way to look up some things like that is they are often required by the state, even if they're a small organization, to file some sort of auditing, some sort of internal audit, financial audit, with the Secretary of State's office. And it'd be interesting to look up that organization's name and see if it comes up. The Secretary of State's office has a list that they put out every year of agencies that are delinquent in filing those reports with the state. I always like to look at that and see if there are any organizations in my coverage area, if they haven't been filing, because it's always fun to write about those and sort of ask the difficult questions. Why haven't you been doing that? And what's going on? And so I don't know. Those are my thoughts. Yes? No, I'm talking about governmental organizations are required to file them. Yeah, there are auditing requirements. Yes, and for very small ones, it's much more lenient. But and I forget it has something to do with the money involved. And they can get exemptions and so on. But I mean, there are so many very small organizations all across the state who have trouble complying with that particular requirement because they are so small. Their funds are so limited. Their personnel, is so limited. And so you have to be a little sympathetic to them. But still, it is a requirement under state law, so they should be complying. Yes, sir?
It's slightly off topic, but public access. And that has been, many years ago, I did a series of reports on all the state mental institutions in Massachusetts. There was one for huge, for 1,800, and you never could get access to it. So I finally contacted a member of the committee that oversees it, and he invited us to go with him on a visit to this place.
Mm-hmm.
And we took pictures of it. And this was the first time anybody had ever seen publicly what this place looked like. So the fallout of that was the new governor came in, he fired the director of the
Wow. Huh.
But it's just the idea of entirety. It took a year for that to happen.
Yeah. You have to have stamina in public records requests. Unfortunately, I mean, it'd be nice if it was all fast, quick, and easy, but it's not. I had something I wanted to say about that, but I can't remember now. All right. Yes, go ahead. I don't really do that. I know some newsrooms have things like, I think our newsroom to some extent used to have like FOIA Friday, and so I always thought that was a little bit of a bad idea because you don't want to be making requests just because it's FOIA Friday. You want to have a legitimate purpose backing it up. You don't want to abuse this privilege that we have to get public records. So, but no, there is. I mean, I'm not really a normal reporter. I'm an editorial writer, so I don't have a beat per se. My beat is pretty much everything. There are things I try to look at every year. There are public records that I look at every year. Like I always read those terrible stories in foster care, the death investigations. I always read those. I always look at the Secretary of State's office to see what public agencies are delinquent in filing the appropriate audit information. I mean, there's a report that the state puts out every year right around Christmas, which is always a good time to find a story about there's a requirement for larger state agencies to do internal audits of their own organizations, and a lot of them don't do them, and which is interesting. And then the audit reports themselves can also be interesting. So those are a couple of things that I look at all the time, and I've just revealed some of my secrets to you. Now I regret it. But no, I don't regularly make requests for certain public records. But one of the things that one of the people I talked to who works in a state agency who deals with public requests, one of the things that they told me was that there are some things that people never ask for and they probably should. And I don't know what she was getting at, but she said like training records, which is interesting to me because obviously there are sometimes requirements within state law that you do that an organization, particularly law enforcement, would have requirements for training. And maybe she was hinting that there's something there, about training records. But so that's my other thought. Anybody else have anything? Yes, sir.
Someone mentioned access to nonprofit records, and just mentioned that nonprofits have to file over a certain budget. They have to file a 990 return with the IRS, and you can find those online very easily. And usually, you'll see what the CEO makes, what their budget is, and who their major donors are, and that's a way to kind of check accountability locally.
Yeah.
Well, and with the state, I'm on several nonprofit boards, and all of them have to report their financial statements annually.
Okay, good. All right, anybody else have anything? Thoughts? Questions? Yes, sir.
Is there anything we can do about access to criminal juvenile records? We occasionally have, a young person caught in a crime cause reports report, and all we can get is what's going to be in the press release on that.
I don't think so. Juvenile cases are, I don't have much personal experience with that, just indirect, and hesitate to say anything to try to sound authoritative, but I would say no. Juvenile records, no, they're very careful about that. I mean, I go to the courthouse frequently because I'm interested in criminal proceedings and so on. Juvenile cases, those things are locked down. So I think no, but I would ask the district attorney in the area. If they're not that talkative, I'd try another one in somewhere else and see if there are windows that are available. But I think the answer is the windows are closed. But
what about the organization itself that may have some sort of report that they file or something on, like if it's a sports organization, the team may have to file something on their protocol. Would that still fall under the juvenile?
Well, I think if it's dealing with kids, probably you won't get anything. I haven't dealt with that very much, but that's my understanding at least. So, all right, everybody happy? You feel like you learned a lot, and I managed to do that. Nobody asked me about this. Don't we have any journalists? Don't people want to know? Don't people want to know what's going on with this? Isn't that your big question? That is the question. What is this? And how was I able to pull this off despite that injury? You know? I mean, that is the real issue. But, and if you want to know, please make a public records request. All right, thank you.